It was a rope-a-dope. Maybe the idea was just to bore people into tuning out.
Yeah, get it off the television.
Yeah.
And if that was the plan, it was a successful plan,
Right.
I think.
And it's a generous thing to think that's a strategy. Why don't we take a look at Stephen Castor, who was the lead interrogator for the Republicans, the deputy attorney. We can take a look at one of his questions.
Sure.
I want to turn to the discussion of the irregular channel you described. Ambassador Sondland, who is Senate confirmed, ambassador to the EU. So his involvement here, while not necessarily part of his official duties as the ambassador to the EU, certainly is not outlandish for him to be interested and engaged pursuant to the President or Secretary Pompeo's direction. Correct?
It's a little unusual for the U.S. ambassador to the EU to play a role in Ukraine policy.
Okay. And, it might be irregular, but it's certainly not outlandish.
We can talk about the specific lines of questioning, and we will do that. But I also think there's something about the body language, the tone, and then ultimately, of course, the actual line of questioning. Now, if President Trump is watching that, compared to Jim Jordan and some of the other congressmen who ask questions later, when they're looking at Stephen Castor, when he's looking at Stephen Castor, do you think he's happy with what he's saying?
Oh, I think he's screaming. I mean, what we know about Trump is he's screaming. I think he's poorly represented there. I think he had a right to have one of the best attorneys in the country, and that was certainly not Mr. Castor, from at least that performance. I mean, he might be very good on other situations, but I thought, it was appalling.
So the Republicans have a couple different theories upon which they're pursuing this case, and one of them is this idea that this really was about Ukrainian corruption, and this really was about the Bidens and Hunter Biden having corrupt dealings there. And to that end, there was a moment that we saw with George Kent, who was one of the witnesses, testifying a little bit about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden's possible involvement in Ukraine. Why don't we take a look at that real quick? Okay, we're going to have that in just a second. But when we see these kinds of theories being made, that one in particular, when you think back on the question that you've seen so far, do you feel like when we talk about muddying the water, the Republicans have been successful in making that case?
Well, I think that it certainly has caused me to think, why couldn't the president ask about that? I mean, here you got this incredibly corrupt oil company, and you got the vice president of the United States getting involved in the internal affairs of that company and allegedly suppressing a prosecution. Certainly, I think the president is entitled to ask that, of whoever comes in. Now, is he entitled to withhold money that results in men, women, and children being killed? No, he is not.
And I think that is actually where the Democrats are trying to make the point. Perhaps the question itself, hey, can you look at this, is not a big deal. Hey, can you look at this, do me a favor though, or else, is where this quid pro quo conversation comes in. And we can talk about the legal underpinnings of that in a moment, but I think we can take a look right now at George Kent's testimony around the Bidens. Let's take a look.
The pervasive and long-standing problem of corruption in Ukraine included exposure to a situation involving the energy company Burisma. The primary concern of the U.S. government since 2014 was Burisma's owner, Mykola Zlochevsky, whose frozen assets abroad we had attempted to recover on Ukraine's behalf. In early 2015, I raised questions with the Deputy Prosecutor General about why the investigation of Mr. Zlochevsky had been terminated, based on our belief that prosecutors had accepted bribes to close the case. Later, I became aware that Hunter Biden was on the board of Burisma. Soon after that, in a